This game series adapts to the choices you make. The story is tailored by how you play. This is the splash screen you're met with at the beginning of each chapter of Telltale's The Walking Dead Season 1, and serves as an ominous warning for the decisions you'll have to make in order to survive, and the consequences that follow them. Unlike the Walking Dead TV show that follows Rick Grimes and his crew trying to survive the zombie apocalypse by moving from settlement to settlement yelling, "Coral!" in a questionable accent, the Telltale series has you brave the apocalypse as protagonist Lee Everett, a history professor on his way to jail until the police car transporting him hits a walker. This event sets Lee on the path to meeting a young girl named Clementine, who becomes his surrogate daughter and serves as a direct observer of the decisions Lee, and by extension, you, are forced to make. None of these decisions are easy though, and having Clementine's innocent little doe eyes staring at you as you contemplate your options puts a ton of extra weight behind your decisions. At its core, Telltale's The Walking Dead is a game based around decision making, and with each decision comes the possibility for personal, social, and relational consequences. But today, I'm going to share with you a decision-making process that can help you make better decisions both in-game and in your own life. This is what I learned playing Telltale's The Walking Dead Season 1. Now, before I get too deep into this video, I feel compelled to give you a spoiler warning. I will be spoiling parts of episodes 1 and 2 of Season 1, so if you don't want to know the key decisions or outcomes, go play the game and come back when you're done. It does feel weird giving a spoiler warning for a 10-year-old game, but since I'm not talking about episode 5, you'll be fine. But that's where the decision-making gets real. Decision-making is the ability to make choices based on the available information and potential outcomes they could generate. It's estimated that the average person makes about 35,000 decisions a day, but I'm gonna be honest. I'm not sure how credible that number is because I couldn't find a source that didn't just cite it as some research. However, one number that is agreed upon is that a study out of Cornell University found that we make about 227 decisions each day on food alone, which seems like a fitting statistic since we're going to be talking about Lee's major food-related decision at the end of episode 2, Starved for Help. 227 decisions on food may feel like a lot, but think of it this way. If you wanted to order a pizza for your friend's birthday party, here are just a few of the decisions you would need to make. Where do you order from? Do you call or order online? Are you going to pick it up or have it delivered? How many pizzas do you need? What size? What toppings? Thick or thin crust? Are you going to get breadsticks? A drink? Are you going to look for a coupon? How much are you going to tip? The list goes on and on. Each of those are relatively simple decisions, but even simple decisions can have major consequences like their more complex counterparts. For example, by making this simple choice to have anchovies on the pizza, the consequence could be ruining your friend's birthday party. And if your friend didn't want it, I'm sure Lee would choke down an anchovy pizza at this point. But unfortunately for him, he doesn't have the luxury to pick up a phone and order a pizza when he's hungry. Instead, you are forced to make much more complex and challenging decisions to provide for your group, yourself, and most importantly, Clementine. This is where the 6-step decision-making process comes in, because it will help you make sure that you consider your options and the pros and cons that come with them before you make a final decision. The first step in the decision-making process is arguably the easiest, because it's simply determining the decision that needs to be made. Fortunately, or unfortunately in most cases, Telltale's The Walking Dead is in the driver's seat when it comes to identifying the decisions you need to make. When the game prompts you with a group of dialogue options on your screen to choose from, that's the game identifying a decision for you. So, for the purpose of our step 1, the decision that needs to be made is whether or not Lee should take the supplies from the abandoned car. It's easy to take step 1 for granted, because identifying a decision seems so simple. But when you're trying to identify a decision that needs to be made in your own life, there is a difference between identifying a decision and identifying the right decision. What I mean by that is sometimes the decisions you need to make may feel too hard or overwhelming. So to compensate, you may identify a decision that feels easier to make, but isn't actually the decision that needs to be made. So, before you finish step 1, ask yourself, is this really the decision that I need to make? If the answer is yes, it's time to start step 2, gathering relevant information to help you make your decision. The word relevant in gather relevant information is extremely important because it will help you focus on collecting the information that's actually important to your decision rather than information that would distract you from it. As Lee's trying to decide whether or not to take the food from the unoccupied car, knowing its make and model is irrelevant information that really wouldn't affect his final decision. There are several ways you can gather relevant information for any decision you need to make. Think of things like researching on the internet, asking others for their opinions, reflecting on past experiences, etc. But in a world without internet, Lee must rely heavily on his immediate observations and the people around him. As Lee approaches the car, you gather relevant information from what you see. The car door is open, lights are on, keys are in the ignition, and the gas tank is empty, which may indicate that the car's owner is now Walker Food and those essential supplies are up for the taking. However, you don't know that for sure, and as Lily points out, if you take the food and the owners of the car come back, then you're just monsters who came out of the woods and ruined their lives. At the same time though, Lee and his group have been struggling with food since the beginning of this episode, and just went through several traumatic experiences leading up to this point, which lost them a potential safe haven, a constant supply of food, and ended with an extremely unfulfilling steak dinner. If you know, you know. All of this information is the foundation that will inform your decision on whether or not to take the food from the car. After, or sometimes during, your information gathering, you may stumble across an alternative option you hadn't considered before, which is exactly what you're supposed to do in step 3, consider potential alternatives. You may not always have alternatives, but when one does show itself, it's definitely worth exploring to see if you could have better results. Admittedly, in the case of Telltale's The Walking Dead, they don't give you the options to explore alternatives outside of the choices they give you, which makes sense from a game design perspective, but it makes some of the decisions feel frustrating when you can think of a better alternative that isn't included in their predetermined choices. Think back to the supplies in the car example we've been talking about. If the game gave you a little bit more freedom, it would be easy to explore other alternatives. You could search the surrounding area for the owner of the car, take a small portion of the food and then come back the next day to see if the rest is still there, or just dump all the supplies on the ground so nobody gets them. Hey, I never said all the alternatives would be good. But that's where step 4, weighing the pros and cons of each of your options, comes into play. To weigh the pros and cons, you'll need to utilize the relevant information you gathered, and your emotions, to imagine the positive and/or negative consequences of your potential choices. This is a huge piece of the decision-making process, because it's your last chance to consider your options before you land on a final decision. As you stare into the trunk of the car at the potentially life-saving supplies, there are many things to consider. If you decide to take the food, you're helping your group by making sure they don't starve and they have the supplies needed to make it through the next few weeks. However, the downside to taking the supplies is that it could strain your relationships with some people in the group, most notably Clementine, who voiced her disapproval for taking the supplies early on. She's still quite impressionable, and your decisions shape her view of what's right and wrong. On the other hand, if you leave the food, your group could potentially starve, which could cause the group's morale to drop dramatically and create even tougher decisions that need to be made in the future. This also may be your only opportunity to take these supplies, because if walkers find their way to the car, you may never be able to get back to them, and all those supplies would just be wasted. Clearly, there's a lot to consider, but one potential pitfall in step 4 is analysis paralysis. Regardless of how fun it is to say, analysis paralysis is when you overthink your options so much that it prevents you from making a decision at all. You just get stuck looking for other alternatives or more pros and cons. It's easy to fall into the trap of analysis paralysis, but let me tell you, very rarely is there a perfect decision. However, if you follow the process we've been talking about, you should feel confident that you've done the proper due diligence to be successful in step 5, making your choice. I'm not sure what more I can say about this step. This is where you finally make your decision. When deciding whether or not to take the food from the car, I personally ended up taking it. I knew Clem would feel conflicted and Lily would be resentful, but the fact is, my responsibility was to take care of the group, and they needed that food to survive. The potential consequences of taking the food outweighed leaving it, in my opinion. Even if some folks were mad about it, I thought they'd be less upset when they were able to eat breakfast the next day. As you can see from the episode statistics though, it was a decision that split players right down the middle and will have impacts in future episodes of Season 1, regardless of your decision. Every decision you make in-game and in your own life has consequences. Just remember that consequences isn't exclusively a negative term. They can be positive too, which is why we round off this 6-step process with reviewing the consequences of your decision. It's important to review the consequences to understand their impact on you and others, which should help you make better decisions in the future. I won't go into the specific consequences of the food in the car decision, but there are both major and minor consequences that will affect Lee and his group moving forward. But that's not for me to share, so if you want to know how it ends, you can apply the 6-step decision-making process we covered today and make that decision yourself. And that's it! Do you think I made the right decision taking the food from the car? What pros and cons did you use to help make your decision? Let me know down in the comments. As always, I'll pin my favorite to the top. If you like what you saw today, I'd love for you to subscribe. See you later!